And I'm making this quick recording to answer a question that's relevant right now, and it comes up every time the nodes change position in the sky, and it's whether we should use true node or mean node. There was recently a discussion on Facebook where a bunch of people chimed in, and I'm not going to show that, but I did put my answer, and I think it's pretty obvious that true node is, as it says, the true position of the node. And so I'm going to explain what the difference is between the true node and the mean node. Like a lot of things, it's kind of thrown in this bucket of, well, to me, I prefer this, or I like this, or this kind of thing. Like it's just a sort of preference without really addressing what we're even talking about or putting it in a category, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to first read through my reply because it really kind of states it, then I'll fill in the details. And I put true node. Just like we measure the exact location of every other planet, or you could say the true position, not its mean motion, the true position of the node is its true position. We've only been able to calculate the exact true node position for a few decades. So what? Does that mean we don't use it? Because there were people that said, well, we've only been able to calculate this since the 70s and all this stuff, which is really not very compelling. It just means, yeah. So let me just keep going. Statements about how it's different because it's just a mathematical point in space or something is not very persuasive. We are still measuring it. We are still measuring a location, a position. The fact that we don't see it all the time is not relevant. We are measuring it, and things are influenced by it, so where is it? The only difference between the node and the other planets and their exact location and movement is we were able to observe the direct and retrograde motion of starry planets. Thus, their retrograde motion has always been known. If we use the mean node, then why not use the mean Jupiter location rather than use its exact location? Why factor in its retrograde motion or the retrograde motion's exact locations of all the planets? The nodes are grahas, which we locate in space like every other graha. Because their mean motion was incredibly accurate and we couldn't see their slight direct motion, meant that for thousands of years the mean calculation was fine and good enough. But now that we know better, why would we not use the exact location like we use the exact location of all bodies that move forward and retrograde? There is no difference. If there is, please enlighten me as to how. And then I put, lastly, by the way, I have numerous case studies which illustrates events where the true node and the mean node change, and the true node seems to give better results. I'm not going to go into the case studies. They're the least compelling, but I've talked about these things publicly as well, where you can see a recurrence transit based on the true node, and then something comes back exactly right on that true node, but it's not shown by the mean node, for example. But that's the least compelling. The most compelling is this part, because this is where it really breaks down, at least the sort of non sequitur, reasons to use the mean node. If we use the mean node, why not use the mean Jupiter location, or rather than use its exact location? Why factor in its retrograde motion or the motion's exact locations of all the planets? The nodes are grahas, which we locate in space like every other graha. Because their mean motion was incredibly accurate and we couldn't see their slightly direct motion, meant that for thousands of years, the mean calculation was fine and good enough. So this is what I'm talking about. What we're talking about with mean node and true node is that the mean direction indicates that you started here and you ended here, and you're not factoring in its exact precise location as it goes forward and stops and goes retrograde back and forth. This is how we do it with regular planets. We could just use the mean calculation of Jupiter or Saturn or Mercury. Imagine no Mercury retrograde. Imagine if we just calculated its mean direction based on the fact that it usually moves from west to east, and we don't factor in that its motion is like this. We don't factor that in. We would just take, let's say, a time increment and a direction and just calculate a mean motion. For example, let's say Jupiter takes a year to go this far, okay? So it takes a year to go this far. We would just divide this much distance by a year, and that would then show its mean motion. Its mean motion would be from here to there, this long. So we'll just break this up into that long and calculate it like that. Okay? So let's say, like, for Jupiter, that's 360 days to go 30 degrees. Okay? So that's like a degree every, 30? Yeah, that's like a degree every 10 days or something. Okay? So then we would just kind of go like this, like that would be the motion. And that's where we would locate it. We would locate Jupiter that way. This is where it is based on its mean motion. But we don't do that, and we never have, because we can see Jupiter, and we see that its motion is like this. Duh, 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 or something, right? Jupiter usually goes retrograde once in a sign. It goes like this, and then like this. That's how Jupiter's true location is calculated. Duh, duh, duh. We measure it because we can see it, and we see its true location, because the grahas that we see, which are all of them except the nodes, have always been measured with their exact location, which includes their retrograde motion. So again, we would never just say, well, we're not going to factor that in. We're just going to calculate its mean motion like this. Well, then no planet would ever be where it actually is in the sky based on the mean motion. So instead of going like this, duh, 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 we're going to calculate it like this. Well, that's not actually where it is. So this is exactly the same thing with the node, except the node moves backwards. So why is the node different? Well, because we don't see the node all the time. We only see the node when we have eclipses. So what happens with the node, and the reason the mean node calculation was so prevalent for so long, is because we would see the node most likely when we have a lunar eclipse, because half the world sees the lunar eclipse. So here's the node popping up now. Okay, here it is. Now we don't even see it for another about 18 months. Now here it is again. Okay. So it takes about 18 months for the node to pop up. We see it every 18 months, plus or minus a little bit. Whatever the exact thing is, I should probably know it, but I have enough in my head. But we don't see it the rest of the time because it's this point in space. It's not a bright light moving in the sky like this. So for thousands of years, the mean node was fine because it is very close. But once we learned how to measure the exact movement of the Earth, of the moon as it orbits in relation to the ecliptic, the moon actually orbits around what's called the barycenter of the Earth, and they have this relationship. Once we started to learn to measure the moon's, revolution, even more accurately, then of course that gets applied to where the node is in its true position. As we learn to measure the moon more accurately, we learn to measure the node more accurately. So we have now the true node, where the node truly is, not just its mean calculation based on a very close but imprecise direction. Again, if we wouldn't do that, we don't do that with any of the other planets, and why would we? I mean, imagine Saturn. Saturn goes forward in retrograde. Saturn would be a better example. Saturn takes, let's say 2.5 years to go this far. And the way he does it is like this. This is Saturn's true motion. That's how he moves. He moves about this fast, then he goes backwards. Then he goes about this fast, then he goes backwards, then he goes this fast. So he takes that long to cover this amount of distance, and we measure exactly where he is. Imagine if we didn't do that, we used the mean Saturn, and instead we located Saturn and said Saturn is here. This is how Saturn moves, based on his mean, based on mean Saturn. It's like this. And we always located it that way. So instead of it being here before it goes retrograde and then goes to here, it's actually like here. No, that's not where he actually is. He moves faster than his mean motion, then he goes backwards, then he moves again. That's his exact speed. So this is the principle. It's that simple. And again, if I'm wrong, correct me. Tell me how that's wrong and why we shouldn't do it. I honestly don't know why it's debatable. I really don't. I'm not trying to, again, be that guy who is, fighting with people. I just don't really understand why it's a debatable point. So there you go. That's mean node and true node.